Did you know that more than 90% of viewers don't subscribe to our channel? If you're watching this and haven't subscribed yet, please consider hitting that subscribe button. We don't run ads on our videos, so we don't earn anything from them. Every subscription, every like, every comment truly means the world to us. Your support keeps our passion alive and motivates us to create more. We'd also love to hear from you. Tell us where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Let's start our story. Story number 1. The first story is about a driver named Daniel Pike, a long-haul trucker who preferred the night shift. He liked the emptiness of the interstate after midnight, the way the world narrowed to a tunnel of asphalt and headlights. Fewer cars, fewer distractions, better mileage, he always said. Just him, the road, and the soft murmur of his favorite late-night radio station. He had been on the same route for years, westbound through the desert, cutting across miles of dry scrub and rock, nothing but the occasional rest stop and faded billboard to break the monotony. Daniel could list every exit in order, tell you exactly where the pavement dipped or where a pothole liked to wait in the dark. That was why, on that particular night, the exit sign bothered him more than it should have. It appeared out of the dark like any other sign, a green rectangle in the headlights, hanging above the empty stretch of highway. The font was standard. The reflective paint flashed clearly. It read, Exit 47, Ashbury, 1 mile, gas food lodging. Daniel frowned. He ran that road once a week. There was no Exit 47, and there was definitely no town called Ashbury in that endless strip of dust and Joshua trees. He leaned forward a little, squinting past the bug-smeared windshield. Maybe he'd just never noticed it before. Maybe it had been built recently. But that didn't make sense either. New construction took ages, and other drivers would have mentioned it on the radio. Still, confusion was better than boredom. He checked his fuel gauge. Half a tank left. Plenty to get him to his usual stop another hour ahead. But this sudden, unnamed curiosity tugged at him more than routine. A mile later, another sign appeared. Exit 47, Ashbury, 1/4 mile, open 24 hours. The arrow pointed right, toward a ramp that curved into darkness. No glow from town lights, no spill of neon, just more night. He thought about the route, the miles he knew. There should have been nothing here but a long downhill stretch and a lonely rest area. Yet the exit waited, real and solid, the white lines crisp, the pavement smooth and fresh. As his rig glided past the dashed white markings, Daniel felt a quiet pressure in his chest, a mix of unease and a strange, stubborn curiosity. Maybe it was a detour. Maybe there had been construction he hadn't heard about. Maybe he was just tired. At the last second, he flipped on his turn signal and guided the truck toward the off-ramp. The trailer swayed gently behind him as the rig left the interstate. The ramp was empty, no other vehicles ahead or behind. The sound of the highway faded as he descended into a wide curve, the guardrails catching his low beams and sending soft reflections back at him. At the bottom of the ramp, a simple sign stood on a metal post. Welcome to Ashbury. Pop 482. The numbers looked freshly painted. Next to the population count, though, a dark smudge ran downward, like someone had tried to scratch it out. Daniel rolled past it slowly, glancing at the GPS mounted to his dashboard. The little digital map showed nothing but blank tan space where the ramp should have been. No road. No town. No exit. The screen still thought he was cruising along the interstate. He tapped it lightly. The icon didn't move. Ahead, a 2-lane road stretched into the dark. No advertising signs, no convenience store logos, just a pale stripe of pavement vanishing into scrub and shadows. Still, he had already committed to the turn. He followed the road. After half a mile, small dots of light appeared ahead, floating low to the horizon. Street lamps, he thought. Finally, he passed a faded wooden sign, lit only by his own headlights. Ashbury, founded 1919, where the road rests. The slogan made him shiver more than it should have. Maybe it was the hour. Maybe it was the silence. The town emerged almost all at once. A short main street with angle-parked spaces along both sides. A few low brick buildings with dark windows. A diner with a peeling red and white awning. A motel with a flickering vacancy sign. An old-fashioned gas station stood on the right, its pumps painted a dull, chipped red. A tired dog slept on the station's porch, head resting on its paws. What struck Daniel most was that nothing looked abandoned. Exactly. Just quiet, as if the town held its breath. He rolled his truck slowly through, the engine humming low. No other vehicles moved. No curtains twitched. The motel office light was on, but no one sat at the front desk. A neon sign in the diner's window buzzed faintly, open 24 hours, but the booths were empty, and the chrome stools at the counter stood vacant. The gas station at least had function. A paper sign taped to the office door. Pay at pump. See attendant if needed. He pulled in, lining the rig up carefully beside the diesel pump. The dog on the porch raised its head, ears pricking, eyes reflecting a soft emerald in his headlights. It watched him without barking. Daniel set the brake and climbed down from the cab, the cool desert air brushing his skin. It was unusually still. No wind, no crickets, no distant hum of other traffic. Just his engine ticking as it cooled, and the dry crunch of gravel under his boots. He swiped his card at the pump. The screen blinked once, then displayed, "Welcome, Daniel." His hand froze on the keypad. He hadn't entered a name. There was no fleet profile loaded into this pump, no reason it should know who he was. For a second, he convinced himself it was a coincidence. Maybe every customer saw that greeting. Maybe someone had programmed the name in as a joke. Then the message changed. Late tonight. Long drive. Fuel needed? A thin line of cold rolled down his back. The night seemed to press closer around him. The empty street suddenly heavier. He glanced toward the station office, expecting maybe a laughing teenager at a dusty computer, or an attendant watching from behind glass. The office was dark. No movement. The dog hadn't shifted. Its eyes followed him steadily. The pump beeped before he could pull his card out. The display changed again. Payment approved. Begin fueling. He stared at the numbers. No price per gallon. No amount. Just an open invitation. Something about getting back on the interstate and pretending none of this had happened suddenly felt urgent. He reached for his card to cancel the transaction. Before he touched it, the pump clunked softly, the hose shivering as diesel began to flow without his hand on the handle. The meter started to spin, counting gallons, yet he hadn't opened his tank. Daniel stepped back, heartbeat noticeable now in his throat. He glanced at the side of his truck. The fuel cap was closed, untouched, yet he could hear a faint, glugging sound, as if the tank were filling. It was impossible. It was also happening. He took another step back, boots crunching on gravel. The dog rose slowly from the porch, not menacing, just watchful. Its head tilted as if curious. Out on the street, a single traffic light hung over the intersection, cycling through green, yellow, red, for no cars at all. He listened. No laughter, no engine sounds beyond his own, no voices. When the pump clicked off, the display finally changed again. Tank full. Have a safe trip, Daniel. He forced himself to move. Hand steady or not, he climbed back into the cab, shut the door, and locked it out of habit. His fingers trembled only a little as he turned the key and brought the engine back to life, grateful for the familiar rumble. The GPS still showed him on the interstate, miles back, as if he'd never taken the exit. He pulled out of the station, checking both mirrors. The dog had returned to its spot. The gas station lights hummed quietly. No other light in town seemed to change. At the edge of Ashbury, another sign waited in his headlights. Thanks for stopping by. Come back soon. He followed the road out until it bent and climbed, expecting to see the ramp back up to the interstate. Instead, after a gentle curve, he found himself rolling once more into Ashbury. Same welcome sign, Same angle parking, Same diner, Same gas station, Same dog. He let off the accelerator. The rig coasted, his heart sinking with each familiar landmark passing by again. He hadn't turned around. He hadn't taken a side road. Yet he was back where he had started, as if the town had folded the road into a loop and drawn him backward without moving. His throat went dry. The fuel gauge read full, the needle higher than it had been. He checked the clock. Only 15 minutes had passed. He drove through the town again, this time not stopping, the rumble of the rig louder in his ears. At the far side, the same "Thanks for stopping by" sign greeted him. He passed it with more speed, following the thin ribbon of road into darkness. The curve was the same. The distance felt the same. After less than a minute, The town emerged a third time. He slowed almost to a stop, staring through the windshield, as Ashbury revealed itself again like a stage set being rolled out for an audience of one. The dog on the gas station porch stood now, tail still, watching. The diner sign flickered, one letter dimmer than before. The motel's vacancy sign buzzed loudly, a harsh electric drone that hadn't been there earlier. Daniel's hands tightened on the wheel. He forced himself to keep going, rolling past the gas station without glancing at the pumps. The pumps' digital display lit up on its own as he passed, numbers flickering and freezing on the amount he had supposedly bought. At the far edge of town, he braced himself, concentrating on every detail. The sign, the curve, the feel of the tires on asphalt. The road didn't change. It curved gently to the right, then straightened. The desert widened around him, and then, as if someone pressed rewind, the welcome sign slid back into his headlights. The words Ashbury, founded 1919, staring at him for the fourth time. A thin, steady tension settled behind his eyes, that same weight that comes just before a headache. None of this made sense. But his truck was real. The wheel under his hands was real. The miles on his odometer were ticking upward. He checked his radio for the first time since leaving the highway. The late-night host's voice was gone. Only a soft, empty hiss poured from the speakers. He turned the volume knob up. The hiss didn't get louder. It just filled the cab like breathable fog. He switched channels, hopping from station to station. Every single one held the same thin, hollow static. He turned it off. The silence felt worse. On the next pass through Ashbury, he pulled his rig to a stop right in the middle of the main street. The engine idled, vibrating up through the floor. He considered honking the horn, shouting, doing something to force a reaction from this quiet, echoing place. Before he could, he noticed that one window had changed. On the second floor of a brick building to his left, a single light now glowed behind a sheer curtain. A silhouette stood there, a tall, narrow outline like someone was watching the street. It didn't move. It didn't wave. It just existed. Black against soft amber. Daniel's fingers hovered over the horn, then pulled away. Something about drawing attention to himself suddenly seemed unwise. He eased off the brake and tried something different. At the edge of town, just before the "Thanks for stopping by" sign, a narrow dirt track cut to the right, barely wide enough for a truck. It hadn't been obvious before, but now it seemed there, like a whispered suggestion. It was a risk. He could sink the rig or get stuck. But the thought of passing that same welcome sign again and again felt worse than a tow bill. He turned onto the dirt road. Gravel crunched, dust puffed into the air, and the truck jostled on the uneven surface. The town lights receded in his mirrors. The night pressed in closer, thicker, as if those few street lamps had been keeping more than darkness at bay. He kept his speed low, guiding the truck carefully. The dirt road twisted between low, scrubby bushes and occasional boulders. After a few minutes, the road began to climb, winding toward a low ridge. At the top of the rise, he slowed almost to a crawl. The desert spread out beneath him, a dark ocean under scattered stars. In the distance, a pale silver line gleamed faintly the interstate, like a river of dull light. Relief washed through him. If he could just get back to that familiar ribbon of road, he could put Ashbury behind him. Explain the weirdness as fatigue. A dream. A trick of the mind. He eased the rig down the far side of the ridge, following the dirt track as it gradually merged into a rough paved lane. The lane intersected the interstate at a shallow angle, no official ramp, just a worn crossing of old tire marks where other vehicles had slipped on and off over the years. He waited for a break in the distant headlights, then carefully nudged his truck back onto the highway, letting the smooth, known asphalt slide under his wheels like a sigh of relief. The GPS beeped and caught up, his little icon finally snapping onto the right line. The radio, when he tried it again, found his old station. The late-night host's voice returned, mid-sentence, as if it had never been interrupted. And for all you drivers out there crossing the desert tonight, keep those eyes open. Long, empty roads can play tricks on you. He drove for another hour before seeing the familiar glow of his usual truck stop. He pulled in, parked between two other rigs, and sat for a long moment, hands resting on the wheel, listening to the engine. He climbed down and crossed the lot to the convenience store. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed. A coffee machine burbled. A few other drivers milled about, reaching for snacks, yawning. At the counter, the clerk scanned his items and made small talk. Daniel asked, trying to sound casual, if there had been any new construction on the interstate. Any new exits? Any little towns popping up? The clerk frowned. Not out that way, he answered. Hasn't been anything new for years. Just that old closed-down rest area around mile marker 47. They shut it down a while back. Accident or something. Why? Daniel hesitated, then shook his head. No reason. Just thought I saw a sign for a place called Ashbury. The clerk thought for a moment, then slowly shook his head. No Ashbury on that strip. Not that I've ever heard. You sure you weren't dozing off a bit? Road gets weird when you're tired. Daniel wanted to dismiss it that easily. He wanted to write it off as exhaustion. But when he stepped back outside and glanced at his truck, his heart gave one solid, heavy thump. On the side of his fuel tank, a faint, dusty handprint showed in the grime. Long fingers, narrower than his own, streaked downward, as if someone had rested a hand there while he was inside the cab and then slowly slid it away. He ran his own hand next to it for comparison. The strange print was smaller, more slender, and slightly wrong. Not monstrous, not twisted. Just wrong, in a way his mind didn't like to measure. The fuel cap sat exactly as he'd left it, sealed and locked. His gauge still read full. In the years that followed, Daniel avoided that section of highway at night when he could. On the occasions when he couldn't, he watched the mile markers carefully, eyes flicking to the right shoulder where new exits might appear. He never saw the Ashbury sign again. But sometimes, after midnight, when the desert stretched wide and empty and the road sang quietly beneath his tires, a whisper of static would creep into his radio station for a few seconds, just long enough to blur the host's voice into nonsense. In that soft rustling sound, if he listened too closely, he could almost make out a word, repeated very faintly. Soon, soon, soon. And every now and then, when he stepped down from his rig at a truck stop in the middle of nowhere, he would find a fresh handprint on the side of his fuel tank, pressed there in a thin layer of road dust. Always the same size, always the same narrow fingers, as if somewhere out beyond the edge of the map, on a stretch of road that wasn't supposed to exist, a quiet little town still waited where the road rests, watching for the next tired driver who decides to follow a sign that isn't really there. Story number 2. Maria Laird had learned to love the sound of her own engine. It meant motion, purpose, and most importantly, it meant she wasn't truly alone, even when the road ahead was just a ribbon of darkness and the red glow of her dashboard. She hauled freight from the Midwest to the Gulf, usually running overnight. The pay was a little better, the traffic was lighter, and the emptiness of the highway felt like a kind of private world. Out there, it was just her, the hum of the tires, and the quiet crackle of her old CB radio. The CB had belonged to her father. He'd driven long before she did, and when he retired, he handed her that scuffed black box like some kind of torch. He showed her how to wire it in, how to calm her voice when it broke through the static, how to recognize the rhythm of chatter from real road veterans. Keep it on 19, he'd told her. That's where the living are. He'd said it with a half smile, like a joke, but it stuck with her. For years, Channel 19 had been her company. Weather updates from 2 states away, warnings about speed traps and construction zones, the familiar banter between drivers who might never meet in person yet somehow recognized each other by voice alone. Then came the night the usual chatter dropped away and something else took its place. It was early spring, the kind of damp, chilly night when rain hangs in the air without quite deciding to fall. Maria was running south on a stretch of interstate that cut between dense stands of pine, the trees crowding in on both sides of the highway. There were no big towns nearby, just a few distant farm lights and the occasional glow of a gas station miles off the road. The sky was a low, unbroken gray. Her wipers tapped now and then at a mist that left thin streaks on the glass. The CB murmured in the background, half static, half idle talk. Someone in Tennessee complaining about dispatch, someone else joking about diner coffee. She wasn't really listening until all at once, every voice vanished. The speaker went from soft noise to a flat, empty hiss, like someone had cut all the other radios off at once. The sudden absence made the cab feel smaller. Maria frowned and glanced at the little green display. Channel 19 still showed. Signal strength flickered faintly, as if something was trying to break through. "Guess we finally drove out of range," she muttered. She reached toward the dial to switch over to scan mode. Before her fingers touched it, a voice slid out of the static, clear, and close, as if the speaker were sitting right beside her. "Southbound 18-wheeler, blue cab, white trailer." Maria. She jerked her hand back and grabbed the steering wheel with both hands. Her pulse thumped too loud in her ears. "Who's that?" she asked automatically, keying the mic. "Come again?" No one answered. The speaker stayed silent a beat too long, just a faint breath of noise. Then the same voice spoke again, slow and even. Maria Laird, "Watch your right lane now." The tone wasn't demanding. It was steady, calm, certain. Her eyes flicked to the passenger side mirror. At first, she saw nothing but the soft smear of her trailer lights on wet pavement. Then, maybe 100 yards ahead, the beam of her headlights broke across something dark and low, lying halfway into her lane. Instinct slammed through her. She eased left without jerking, checked the other mirror, and cleared the obstacle with room to spare. As she passed, the object resolved one of those thick retread tire strips, peeled off someone else's rig, coiled like a black snake. If she'd hit it dead on at that speed, it could have blown her own tire, or sent a vibration up through the trailer that would have woken her in a panic if she'd been more tired than she was. "Lucky," she breathed. Except it hadn't been luck. Someone had told her, seconds before the strip appeared in her lights. She grabbed the mic again. "Breaker, southbound on I-55, appreciate the heads up." "Which one of you was that?" The radio answered with an airy rush of static, as featureless as wind. No chuckle, no, "You're welcome." No call sign. Just hiss. She flipped the channel selector back and forth, checked the squelch, smacked the side of the CB with the heel of her hand like that would help. Nothing changed. The display still read 19. After a few minutes, the regular chatter bled back in. Two drivers arguing about where to find the best pie at 3 in the morning. Nobody mentioned the strip of rubber. Nobody mentioned her. By the time she reached the next truck stop, Maria had convinced herself someone had just been looking far ahead and called it in without bothering to chat. Radios reached far. Visibility sometimes did too. Maybe the warning hadn't been as uncanny as it felt. She parked, grabbed coffee, stretched her legs. The whole time, something in the back of her mind kept replaying the way that voice had said her name. Not her handle. Her name. No one out there used Maria on the air. The second time it happened, she was sure it wasn't her imagination. A week later, on a different run, she rolled through the edge of a storm system. Rain this time. Real rain. Thick and relentless. It drummed on the roof of the cab and smeared the world into streaks of gray and red and white. Her defroster fought to keep up with the fogging windshield. Every reflector on the side of the road looked twice as bright under the sheen of water. Visibility shrank to a tight tunnel. Her hands stayed at 10 and 2. Channel 19 was alive with weather warnings and location checks. Drivers passed along reports of flooded shoulders, standing water, low spots. Maria listened carefully, grateful for the extra eyes. Then, just like before, the CB went abruptly silent. Not off, just empty. Nobody keying up. No open mics. Her truck's tires hissed on the wet pavement. Wipers thumped. The storm roared. For 10 long seconds, the only sound from the CB was a low, trembling rustle. Then, Maria, dropped 5 miles per hour. Same voice as before. Same even tone. Not a question, a directive. She felt a prickle at the base of her neck. "Who is this?" she asked. "Identify." No answer. The display on the radio flickered. "Shirzio. Shirzio. Run." For an instant, the numbers scrambled, sliding into a symbol she didn't recognize. It looked almost like 0, or maybe 00, before it snapped back into 19. She glanced at her speedometer. 62 and a 70. Reasonable for the rain. "Not funny," she said under her breath, but some instinct old and animal made her toe ease off the accelerator. Her rig dropped to 57, then 55. She scanned the mirrors. Nothing behind her but a distant streak of headlights blurred by the deluge. Nothing ahead but rain. 10 seconds later, as she rounded a shallow bend, Her headlights flared across a wide sheet of water spanning almost the whole right lane and half of the left. It pooled from the grassy median to the outer shoulder, ripples dancing as more rain slammed into its surface. At her earlier speed, hitting that much standing water all at once could have sent her skidding, floating, maybe worse. At 55, she had time to ease a little more off the accelerator, keep her steering true, and ride through it. Her front tires sliced into the water with a roar. For a moment, the wheel felt lighter, the rig wanting to drift, but then the weight settled again. The trailer straightened behind her. She exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The radio clicked softly. "Good," the voice said. "Copy that, southbound. Keep it steady. We've got you." Static swallowed it whole. She didn't touch the CB for the rest of that night. She drove with the radio on low, listening, waiting. But the strange voice did not return. Only regular drivers, regular jokes, regular complaints. At her next fuel stop, she brought it up casually to a couple of drivers sitting in the red vinyl booth of the small truck stop diner. Men and women of all ages, silhouettes hunched over late-night breakfasts and maps. "You ever get weird calls on 19?" she asked, stirring sugar into her coffee. "Like someone who knows a little too much?" An older driver with a sun-creased face and pale eyes looked up from his plate. "You mean the ones who call out the troopers by first name?" he joked. "Yeah. I've heard those," she pressed. "No, I mean, someone using your name when they shouldn't." He gave her a longer look, something appraising in it. "You hearing spooks, girl?" "One." A woman across from him laughed. "Don't start that," she said. "People are jumpy enough overnight as it is." He shrugged. "Tell her it ain't just a campfire yarn." The woman rolled her eyes but said nothing. The older driver leaned on his elbow. "There's a story, that's all," he said to Maria. "Old-timers say there's a channel that isn't on the dial, a kind of emergency net. Way I heard it, some drivers got caught in a pileup years back. Radios stuck on transmit when the power shorted. Their last calls kind of stayed. Echoed. Now they break through when somebody's in real trouble. Give you warnings. Road conditions. That sort of thing." Maria tried to laugh it off. "Ghost dispatch, huh? Something like that." He stabbed a piece of toast. "They say you get 3 saves. After that, you don't hear them anymore. Either they've done their job, or they expect you to pay it forward. Depends who's telling it." The woman shook her head. "Or, more likely, you just change routes or fix your junk, CB," she muttered. Maria smiled, but the story lodged somewhere behind her ribs. She told herself it was nonsense. Folklore. A way to give shape to close calls and lucky breaks. Still, the next few nights, she kept half an ear tuned for that steady, strange voice. Part of her hoped to hear it. Part of her prayed she wouldn't. Weeks passed with nothing unusual. The radio was just a radio again. Then, one foggy night in the mountains, they came back. She was hauling a light load along a narrow, twisting highway that climbed through a low range, the kind of 2-lane road that made her more careful than usual. Guardrails were few. Drop-offs were not. Fog rolled and pooled between the trees, sometimes thick as wool, sometimes thin enough that she could see the faint glow of the moon behind it. Her high beams only made the fog worse, so she kept to low, eyes straining for each painted line and reflector. Her speed stayed well under the limit. No other headlights pierced the mist ahead or behind. The CB hissed softly. No chatter. The mountains often ate signals. Her shoulders ached from tension by the time she reached a long, shallow downhill grade. Trees pressed close on both sides, their tops vanishing into gray. The road curved left, then right, then left again. Signs warned about falling rocks. A yellow diamond advised trucks to keep their speed at a crawl. She rode the engine brake, foot ready to tap the pedal if she needed more. Halfway down the grade, the CB's static thinned out, like air sucked from a room. "Maria." The word slipped out so crisply that she felt it more than heard it. She didn't answer. She watched the road. Maria, hands high on the wheel. Her fingers adjusted without her telling them to. A corner loomed ahead, sharper than the last few. Her headlights barely traced its arc before it disappeared into fog. "Now," the voice said. "Ease left. Just a little." Her muscles locked. All her training screamed to keep center, not drift toward the other lane on a blind curve in fog. She could not see if any car was coming uphill. "Trust us," the radio whispered. Not a single voice now. A susurrus, as if more than one speaker shared the same breath. Left. Now. Somewhere deep inside, reason gave way to instinct, or maybe to the simple human need to believe that someone else could see more than she could. She shifted the wheel a few inches left as she entered the turn. Her headlights spilled across the inside edge of the curve, and for a split second she saw why. A fresh rock slide had scattered stones and broken chunks of sandstone across the pavement, most of them piled in a low ridge hugging the right side of her lane. One boulder, big enough to smash an axle, jutted out toward the center. If she'd held her usual line, her right front tire would have hit that boulder dead on. She breathed out and guided the rig through the opening, inches to spare on either side, her left tires kissing the faded yellow center line. The trailer followed where she led. The whole truck flexed and swayed but stayed upright, intact. At the bottom of the grade, the road straightened. The fog thinned. Adrenaline left her hands buzzing. She pulled onto the first wide gravel turnout she saw and parked, setting the brake with fingers that trembled just enough to annoy her. The CB crackled once more. "3, the many soft voice said. "You're clear now." "Who are you?" she demanded, snatching up the mic. "How do you know my name? What do you want?" The reply came after a tiny pause. "Just keeping the road moving," the voice said. It almost sounded like a smile poured through metal and static. "You won't hear us again. Not unless you're the one calling someday." The carrier clicked off. The hiss returned, ordinary and bland. She scanned up and down the channels, heart pounding, asking for the driver who had just warned her. No one answered. One voice, far away, complained about a scale house. Another asked if the fog was as bad on the other side of the range, but no one admitted to seeing the rock slide before she had. Later, at a truck stop in the valley, she mentioned the slide. A local driver shook his head. "Yeah, they've been worried about that stretch for years," he said. "You're lucky. Couple of drivers went over the edge there back in the day when their loads pushed them too hard through the bend." She didn't mention the radio. She didn't mention the voice. After that night, the CB behaved like any normal piece of equipment. It picked up regular channels. It never again dropped into that strange, empty hush, with only one clear voice breaking through. Once, months later, on a quiet stretch of interstate where the only company was the moon and a few distant taillights, Maria reached out to turn the CB off. Her fingers brushed the volume knob, and in that brief contact, the speaker gave a tiny pop. For a heartbeat, no more. She thought she heard a murmur beneath the static, like overlapping words too soft to make out. Then it was gone. On long grades and heavy weather, when she found herself calling out hazards for newer drivers, describing what lay around a bend or over a hill, she caught herself wondering about all the other warnings bouncing back and forth through the night. All the narrow misses. All the drivers whose voices had cut off mid-sentence a long time ago. Sometimes, when the road was very quiet and her headlights stretched far ahead with nothing to catch on, she would glance at the CB's green display, half expecting the numbers to flicker, to scramble, to show some channel that wasn't supposed to exist. They never did. Still, whenever she passed the place in the mountains where the road curved sharp and the rockfall scarred the shoulder, she found herself speaking softly into the mic, even if no one had called first. "Southbound. Watch your right," she would say. "Rocks on the inside. Take it slow. Keep it steady." The radio would crackle, then carry her voice away into the night, into that invisible web of signals and stories that made up the hidden life of the highway. And somewhere, she sometimes felt, someone might be listening on a channel no dial could find, making sure the road kept moving, one more night, a little safer than it might have been. Story number 3. Elliot Crane liked order. His logbooks were always tidy, his dash always wiped down, and his runs almost always landed within a 15-minute window of the time he guessed in his head. He didn't think of himself as superstitious, just careful. Careful drivers went home. Sloppy ones didn't always. When his company shifted him onto nights running a forest corridor between 2 states, he treated it like any other route. New schedule, new scenery. The only thing that gave him pause was the truck itself. Fleet number 618. "You're taking 618, the dispatcher said that first night, sliding a clipboard across the desk. "Fresh from the shop. Try not to add to its reputation." Elliot raised an eyebrow. "Reputation?" The dispatcher shrugged, too quickly. "Electrical gremlins. Couple drivers didn't like how it handled. Nothing serious. Mechanics cleared it. A mechanic walking by snorted but didn't say anything. That bothered Elliot more than the words. He found 618 sitting under the yellow wash of the yard lights, white trailer humming softly from a refrigerated load, blue cab clean and recently washed. The paint still shone. The tires were good. When he climbed into the cab, the smell of industrial cleaner and a faint trace of someone else's cologne lingered under the plasticky new truck scent. The only thing that felt out of place was a small dent in the interior wall of the sleeper. A shallow depression the size of a fist, as if someone had struck it once, hard, and then stopped. He ran through his checks, plugged in his GPS, tuned the radio, and took 618 out onto the highway. For the first few hours, nothing about the truck felt odd. The steering was responsive, the brakes firm. The coolant temp held steady. The load rode smooth. The CB muttered with the usual trivia of the road. His route that night took him through long stretches of pine forest. Out there, the highway narrowed to 2 lanes each way with no median, just a stripe of grass and reflector posts. The trees crowded close. Overhead, the sky disappeared behind a ceiling of stars and dark branches. He settled into the rhythm of it. Mile markers ticked by. The forest became a shadowed blur, broken only by the occasional rest area sign or the faint glow of a farmhouse far back in the trees. Sometime after 1 in the morning, as the dashboard clock slid quietly toward 1:50, he saw the sign for mile 213 flash past in his headlights. A minute later, something knocked on the sleeper wall directly behind his seat. 3 sharp taps, then silence. Elliot stiffened. It wasn't the rattle of something loose in a cabinet. It had a deliberate cadence, like knuckles on wood. He frowned into the darkness of the cab's rear. The curtain to the sleeper was half open. Beyond it, the neatly made bunk lay undisturbed. No coffee mugs, no unsecured gear. Probably just the load shifting, he muttered, though the sound had come from the cab wall, not the trailer. Still, he forced himself to relax. New truck, new noises. He finished the run without incident and chalked it up to his own nerves. The second night, it happened again. Same route, same late hour. The trees leaned close around the highway, their trunks alternating black and silver in his headlights. His gauges sat where they should. The radio murmured low. He passed the sign for mile 213. This time the knock came more distinctly. 3 taps, a pause, then 3 more, then 3 again. He knew that pattern. Everyone did. Even if they'd never needed it, 3 short, 3 long, 3 short, tapped out. As clear as if someone whispered it in his ear. Saws. A chill traced his spine. The wheel felt briefly slick under his palms. He flicked his eyes to the sleeper. Nothing had changed. The curtain breathed gently with the motion of the truck. The shadowed dent in the wall, just above the mattress, looked deeper now in his imagination. He glanced at his mirrors. The trailer rode steady. No vehicles crowded him ahead or behind. The road was dry. Wind barely brushed the trees. 6:18, you got critters in there? A voice crackled over the CB, startling him more than it should have. A driver he'd overtaken a few miles back was chuckling. You just jumped like a cat. Thought I heard something in the bunk, Elliot replied, hoping his voice sounded casual. Guess I'm not used to this truck yet. Forest messes with your head, the other driver said. Sound bounces around. Watch for deer up near 214. The channel went back to static. Elliot finished the run, but the pattern nagged at him. When he parked in the yard and shut down, he climbed into the sleeper with a flashlight, pressing his ear to the wall where he'd heard the knocks. The cold plastic and thin insulation muffled the distant tick of cooling metal. He thumped the wall lightly with his fist, listening to the sound. It was hollow, but steady. Nothing seemed loose. No wire harness rattled, no panel flexed. He didn't find any explanation. Just that small, smoothed-in dent, right about where his head would rest if he lay on his side facing the wall. On his third night with 618, he told himself he wouldn't let a little noise get under his skin. He refused to glance at the dashboard clock too often as the forest closed in. He kept the CB low, classical music streaming from his phone even lower. White lines sliding under the hood, in a comforting, endless rhythm. When the mile 213 sign loomed out of the dark, its white numbers reflecting bright and plain, he gripped the wheel a little tighter without meaning to. The knock came right on time. 3 sharp raps from the wall. A pause. 3 heavier, spaced out as if someone were dragging their knuckles. Another pause. 3 quick taps again. He forced himself not to look back. He kept his eyes on the road, his jaw clenched. "All right," he said aloud, mostly to himself. "If there's something you need me to see, you'll have to try harder than that." Immediately, the cab's radio cut out. The classical music vanished mid-note. The CB dropped into a thin hiss. The dashboard backlight dimmed for a second, then flared too bright before settling. The vent on his left blasted a gust of cold air, far colder than the spring night should have allowed. Then, from the speaker, buried in the static, another sound crept in. It was faint, fragile, as if played from far away on a tape left too long in the sun. A stuttering, panicked breathing, shallow and quick. Elliot's mouth went dry. He reached for the volume knob with fumbling fingers, half ready to twist it off. In that moment, his headlights swept over something on the shoulder. Just ahead on the right, clamped to a metal post, a small wooden cross leaned, its paint weathered, its plastic flowers faded. He'd passed dozens of roadside memorials in his career. This one stood closer to the lane than most, almost brushing the white rumble strip. The beam caught on a name scrawled across it in black marker. Reed. The rest blurred past before he could read it. The memorial vanished into the darkness behind his trailer. The breathing in the speaker hitched. Then, as quickly as it had begun, everything snapped back to normal. The vent air warmed. The music resumed at its previous bar. The CB crackled with a far-off voice asking about fuel prices. Elliot drove the remaining miles in a tunnel of thought. Back at the yard, instead of heading straight for the office, he went looking for the mechanics. He found one of them, a broad-shouldered woman named Shay, leaning against a tool chest with a mug of coffee in hand, smear of grease on her cheek. "Hey," he said, nodding toward 618. "You worked on that one, right?" "Too often," she replied. "You finally bringing it back broken? Or just complaining on principle? What happened to the last driver who took it on the forest run?" Her eyes flicked toward the cab, then back to him, cautious now. "Who told you there was a last driver?" The dispatcher hinted. "I saw a memorial at 213. Name said Reed. That ring a bell?" Shay set her mug down. For a moment, the clinks and humming in the shop seemed to fall away behind the weight of that name. "Reed Hill," she said quietly. "Good man. Drove nights. Very particular about his truck. That truck. So what happened?" "Fog, rain, bad timing," she answered. "They say he came into the curve too fast or hydroplaned. Broke through the guardrail, went down into the trees. It wasn't a fireball or anything dramatic. Just didn't walk away." Company retired his call sign, shuffled 618 into local runs for a while. Then dispatch decided trucks don't care about ghosts. She gave Elliot a steady look. "Why are you asking?" Elliot hesitated. Telling a mechanic that her carefully serviced vehicle felt haunted was not high on his list of wise moves. But Shay's expression held more knowing than mockery. "I've been getting knocks in the sleeper at 213, he said slowly. "Same time, same place. And a kind of, I don't know, recording through the radio. Breathing. It sounds like somebody who's in trouble." She rubbed a thumb along the handle of her mug. "Reed used to complain about that wall," she murmured. "Back when the truck was new. Said he heard things in it sometimes. We tore it apart once, didn't find anything wrong. Joked that if he ever had an accident, he'd probably be banging on it from the other side." She managed a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Some jokes age badly." "Is there something wrong with the bridge there?" Elliot asked. "The road? Guardrail's been fixed. Drainage is better. It's tighter than it looks, but if you're running legal, you're fine." She studied him. "You feeling unsafe, take another route. They can complain, but they can't drive it for you." He thought about that as he drove home in his car, the sky paling on the horizon. He thought about it as he tried to sleep through the day. By the time evening came and he found himself back in 618's driver's seat, the memory of the knocks had dulled at the edges but not faded. He could request another truck. He knew that. He also knew another driver would be put behind this wheel instead, under the same pines, past the same mile marker. That bothered him more than the idea of going back himself. On his fourth night, clouds gathered over the forest. The air felt heavy, damp. Mist clung low along the shoulders of the road. His wipers brushed away, intermittent droplets. Traffic was sparse. His headlights tunneled through darkness that seemed thicker than usual. He kept one eye on the road, one eye on his speed, and both ears tuned for more than just engine noise. The knock began sooner this time, long before he saw the green rectangle of the mile marker. 3 rapid taps on the wall. A pause. 3 more. Harder. 3 again. Almost frantic. "Yeah, I hear you," he said under his breath. "I'm listening." The breathing returned on the radio, fast and shallow. It sounded as if someone were right beside the mic, trying to speak but unable to form words. "Tell me what I'm supposed to see," Elliot said. His hands tightened on the wheel. Rain began, a steady patter that deepened into a soft roar on the windshield. He eased off the accelerator as the mile 213 sign appeared ahead, its numbers glistening under the rain. The knocks grew louder with each second. Not just on the sleeper wall now on the floor by his feet, on the passenger door, somewhere under the dash, everywhere at once. The truck vibrated with it, an urgent, wordless clamor. "Okay," he muttered, throat dry. "Okay." He dropped his speed another 10 miles an hour. Hazard lights flicked on, amber flashes strobing off the wet road. There were no cars immediately behind him to be surprised by it. In his mirrors, the forest looked like a single black wall. As he came into the curve just past the marker, his headlights swept across the pavement and across the pale, fresh body of a fallen tree lying across most of the right lane. It was broad and recently downed, bark gleaming with rain, leaves still intact. The storm must have pushed it over only minutes ago, roots torn up from the saturated ground. In the dark and rain, at normal speed, it would have been too close for a fully loaded truck to avoid. Because he was already slowing, Elliot had time. He braked smoothly, felt the rig respond, tires hissing on wet asphalt. The trailer followed, weight pushing but controlled. He edged into the left lane around the narrow gap between the tree's crown and the guardrail, his hazard lights flashing into the night. Once he cleared it, he brought the whole rig to a stop on the shoulder, heart pounding. The knocking fell silent all at once. Rain drummed on the roof. The engine idled. Somewhere in the woods, wind moaned softly through branches. On the CB, a driver's voice crackled in, distant. "Northbound. Got yourself a tree down near 213. Anybody confirm?" Elliot grabbed the mic. "Southbound here. Confirmed. Right lane blocked by a downed tree just past the marker. I'm stopped on the shoulder with hazards. You'll want to slow it way down." He stayed where he was, warning northbound and southbound traffic, until he saw the flashing lights of a highway maintenance truck climbing up out of the dark, orange strobe staining the rain. Only when the crew began setting cones and setting to work on the tree did he lean back in his seat, exhaling every ounce of adrenaline through clenched teeth. A tap sounded behind his head. Just one. Soft and almost apologetic. He turned his head slowly. The sleeper curtain hung half open. In the beam of the small interior light over the bunk, he saw a faint, cloudy imprint on the inside of the side window. Moisture had condensed there, forming the outline of a hand. Not pressed hard, not clawing. Just resting. Fingers splayed as if someone had leaned there, watching the road with him. Elliot swallowed. "Thanks," he said quietly. The handprint blurred and ran as the glass cleared, sliding down in a thin trickle of water. After that night, the knocks at mile 213 stopped. The breathing on the radio never returned. Fleet 618 drove like any other truck through the forest corridor. If new drivers took it, they reported nothing strange beyond the usual creaks and groans of machinery. Elliot didn't tell dispatch all the details. He just wrote a note in his own small, private notebook, tucked behind the dash where he'd once found nobody's log but his own. On nights when the weather turned and the pines swayed hard and black against the sky, he still slowed a little early when he saw the glint of the 213 marker. He still flicked his hazard lights on if conditions merited it, and, almost without realizing, he began to tap the wheel 3 times as he passed the small wooden cross on the shoulder. 3 soft taps, a pause, 3 more, 3 again. Not a call for help this time, but an acknowledgement. The forest listened. The road curled on ahead. And somewhere in the web of thin, invisible things that sometimes linger along familiar routes, a breath, a knock, a presence that leaned just at the edge of sight. Whatever had been trapped in the last moments of a bad night seemed finally, quietly, at rest. Story number 4. Jenna Rios knew her limits, or at least she thought she did. 10 years on the road had taught her where the line sat between focused and fuzzy, between alert and drifting. She drank plenty of water, snacked instead of gorging, took cat naps in her sleeper when her eyelids started to feel heavy. That was why the rest area bothered her. It wasn't anything obvious at first. Just a small stay-to-run pull-off on a wide, flat stretch of interstate that cut through empty fields. 2 long truck lanes, a separate car lot, a low concrete building with restrooms and vending machines, a couple of picnic tables under thin, struggling trees. She first noticed it on a Tuesday at 2 in the morning, pushing through the plains on a refrigerated run. Overhead, the sky was full of bright, clear stars. The land around her was so flat that distant farm lights looked like they were floating. The green sign appeared, reflecting in her headlights. Rest Area, 1 mile. She'd just taken her break an hour earlier. Her log was clean. She wasn't thirsty. She made a note of it anyway. You never knew when you'd need to stop on this lonely stretch. As she rolled past the exit, she glanced over out of habit. 3 vehicles sat in the car lot, parked in a neat row facing the building. Closest to the road, an old white sedan with oxidized paint. Beside it, a dark red minivan. At the end, a pickup with a tarp over its bed. No one moved between them. No one walked their dog under the street lamps. The restroom building glowed faintly, its windows opaque. Jenna thought nothing of it. People slept in their cars all the time. She drove on. 2 weeks later, back on the same route, she saw it again. Same night hours, same long flat horizon, same green Rest Area sign sliding by. She wasn't planning to stop, but habit made her glance over at the lot as she passed. The same 3 vehicles sat in the same 3 spots. Same white sedan, same red minivan, same tarpa-covered pickup. No one at the picnic tables. No one moving in or out of the building. One of the street lights flickered, then steadied. Her first thought was that they were abandoned. That happened sometimes. Cars broke down, got towed, and their owners left them until they could afford repairs. But 3? Altogether? For weeks? On the next trip, she checked again. The sight made the skin between her shoulders tighten. The cars hadn't moved, not an inch. There were no fresh tire tracks around them, no new cars parked nearby. The rest of the lot looked scrubbed and empty, as if someone had cleaned around the 3 vehicles but never touched them. The building lights burned steadily. The vending machine glow was visible through the glass. Everything looked maintained, just stuck. She told herself it was a coincidence or a quirk of the state's storage policies. The mind loved patterns. It found them everywhere. Then came the storm. That night, the sky ahead of her was a low, pulsing bruise. Lightning flashed, not in jagged bolts, but as full a sky glows that turned the field silver for a heartbeat at a time. The weather channel on the radio spoke of strong winds and sudden downpours. Words like cell and gust front rolled out in calm, professional voices. She tightened her grip on the wheel as the first gust hit her side. Her trailer nudged. She corrected, dropped her speed, flicked on her headlights and fog lights both. Overhead, an electronic highway sign blinked to life in amber letters. A severe storm. Rest area, 2 miles. Parking rules relaxed. She hadn't seen that before. The state wanted rigs off the road until the worst passed. It made sense. Her clock read 1:58 a.m. She'd been driving for hours. Her muscles were starting to ache from constant micro-corrections in the wind. Take the break, she told herself. You're not invincible. The green Rest Area sign appeared, haloed in mist. Rain smeared the reflective paint. As she eased off onto the ramp, the storm hit in earnest. Sheets of water slammed the windshield, hammered the roof of the cab. Wind shoved against the trailer. Trees bent, their thin branches whipping. She pulled into the truck lanes and parked near the end, where she could make a clean exit later. The moment she set the brake, the cab felt like a shelter in the middle of chaos, rain roaring on all sides. She looked over at the car lot. The same white sedan, the same red minivan, the same covered pickup, parked in the same order, same angles, Same positions as every time before. This time, though, faint shapes sat behind their windshields. In the sedan, a hunched figure in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, head bowed. In the minivan, a silhouette in the passenger seat, hair a dark mass around their shoulders. In the pickup, two shapes side by side, barely discernible through the tarpa-draped rear window. None of them moved. Probably just sleeping, she muttered, though the hair on her arms rose. Storm like this, they're smart to stay put. She made a quick trip to the restroom, wrapping her jacket over her head as she dashed through the rain. Inside, the building smelled faintly of bleach and something older, like dust and mop water layered over time. The tiled floor gleamed under fluorescent lights. The vending machines hummed along one wall, their coils glinting through glass, chips, and candy bars lined up in perfect rows. A faded tourism poster on the wall showed a family smiling at a lakeside that she didn't recognize. The analog clock over the doorway read 2:14. As she washed her hands, the hand dryer turned on by itself, shrieking warm air into the empty room. She hadn't moved close enough to trip its sensor. She stepped away. It kept going. In the mirror, behind her own reflection, the restroom stalls stood slightly open, every one, closed enough that she couldn't see inside. Open enough to suggest someone had passed through and never quite latched them. She dried her hands on her jeans instead and left. Outside, the rain had eased a fraction, but the wind still howled around the building. Water ran in thin rivers along the curb. She glanced at the car lot again. The sedan's driver's head was still bowed, motionless. The minivan's passenger silhouette hadn't shifted. The pickup's rear window was fogged lightly from the inside. Jenna climbed back into her truck, locked both doors without quite admitting to herself that she was doing it, and settled in the driver's seat. Her clock read 2:11. She set her alarm for 40 minutes, planning a short nap. The storm would roll by. The roads would clear. She reclined the seat just enough, pulled a light blanket over herself, and let the rumbling of distant thunder and the patter of rain lull her. She didn't remember actually falling asleep. A knock snapped her eyes open. 3 quick taps on her driver's door, right beside her shoulder. The kind of brisk, no-nonsense knock a trooper or parking attendant might give. Her heart thudded. She straightened her seat, blinked into the dim cab. Outside, the storm had quieted to a fine drizzle. Her headlights, still on low beam, cast yellow pools on the pavement. A figure stood outside in the rain, just beyond the reach of the light. Taller than average, wearing a reflective safety vest that caught her beams in dull stripes. A cap pulled low hid their face. Their posture was rigidly straight. Jenna thumbed the window controls, rolling it down a few inches. Cool. Damp air slipped in. "Yeah?" she called. "You need something?" The figure stepped closer. The vest's reflective tape glowed, but their features remained oddly indistinct, as if the shadows refused to leave their face. "Storm's bad," the person said. Their voice was neither deep nor high, neither young nor old. It seemed to sit right in the middle of her hearing, emotionless. "Best not to stay long." "I thought that was the idea," Jenna replied. "Sign said parking rules were relaxed." "They are," the figure said. "Just not indefinitely." Rain tapped on their cap brim but never seemed to roll off. The air around them felt too still. Jenna swallowed. "Look, I'm just catching a quick nap. I'll be gone before sunup." The person tilted their head slightly, like they were listening to something distant. "Most folks don't leave once they lie down here," they said. "You know that, right?" "Excuse me?" Jenna asked. The person didn't repeat themselves. Instead, they gestured vaguely toward the car lot. "Been full up for years," they said. "You might not want to join them." Unease clenched in her gut. "What do you mean, full up?" But the figure had already stepped back. 1 stride, 2, and somehow the mist swallowed them. Her headlights didn't catch their retreat. One moment, the reflective vest gleamed. The next, there was only rain. Jenna sat very still, hand on the window switch, feeling her skin prickle. Her clock on the dash read 2:14. She could have sworn she'd been asleep longer than 3 minutes. She checked her phone. 2:14 a.m. The analog clock on the restroom wall, the one she'd glimpsed earlier, had also read 2:14. She rolled the window up the rest of the way and, on impulse, flipped her headlights off. The rest area sank into a softer, more natural darkness. lit only by the sodium lamps overhead. Across the lot, the cars sat exactly as before, except now, she could see their license plates. The sedan's plate was an old style the state hadn't used in at least a decade. The minivan's tag was expired by 7 years. The pickup's plate was so worn that the letters were nearly illegible, yet their inspection stickers gleamed as if new. Wind rattled a plastic trash bag near the picnic table. Somewhere, a loose sign squeaked as it shifted on its bolts. Jenna's breathing sounded too loud in her cab. She turned the key to start the engine again. The truck rumbled to life, gauges springing up, dashboard lights glowing. The clock read 2:14. She frowned and toggled through the menu. Trip odometer, fuel economy, outside temperature. Back to the clock. Ardan Shasifen. Her phone, sitting in its cradle, still said 2:14. She checked the digital watch on her wrist. 2:14. Wind pressed against the side of the cab, and then let go, like a slow, heavy exhale. "Okay," she said softly. "That's not funny." She dropped the truck into gear and eased forward, tires hissing on wet pavement. The ramp back to the interstate sloped gently up ahead, twin white lines guiding her. As she pulled out, she glanced, just once more, toward the car lot. 3 sets of eyes met hers. The bowed head in the sedan had lifted slightly, face turned toward her. Pale, indistinct features, washed out by distance, stared without blinking. In the minivan, the passenger shape had pressed close to the glass. A hand lay flat against the window. Small. Maybe a teenager's. Maybe younger. In the pickup, 2 figures sat side by side, so still they might have been mannequins. Yet something in the angle of their heads suggested attention fixed on her truck. Jenna looked back at the ramp. Her hands were steady on the wheel, but her heart climbed into her throat. The merge lane appeared, striped and wet, leading out into the faint glow of the interstate. She accelerated, signaled, checked her mirror, and saw the rest area entrance sign slide past on her right. Rest area, 1 mile. Her foot jerked on the pedal. She looked at the odometer. It hadn't added the mile she thought she'd just driven. The ramp she'd climbed had somehow become the continuation of the highway instead of its exit. Up ahead, the same low building waited. The same lot. The same pattern of 3 cars. Her clock read 2:14. A thin sweat broke along her hairline. She drove on without slowing, heart thudding. Maybe she'd imagined leaving. Maybe she'd drifted and looped without knowing. But she knew the feel of acceleration, of merging back into traffic. She knew the slope of a ramp. She also knew, with a certainty that made her skin crawl, that time inside this stretch of pavement was stuck. She passed the rest area without turning in. As she rolled by, she saw that the sedan's driver was bowed again. The minivan's passenger turned away. The pickup's window fogged. Reset. Like figures in a display, waiting for the next customer to notice. Her phone screen dimmed, then brightened on its own. 2:14. The highway ahead was deserted. No taillights. No oncoming beams. Just the endless gray ribbon of road painted by her headlights and the occasional green sign. Her eyelids suddenly felt very, very heavy. A thought crept in, unwelcome. What if the only thing keeping her from sliding into whatever those people had become was sheer stubborn wakefulness? How many drivers had pushed a little too far, pulled into that quiet, glowing place, laid their heads down, just for a moment, and never quite gotten up again in the way that mattered? She thought about the figure in the reflective vest, the way they'd said, "full up," like a joking clerk at a motel whose rooms would never empty. She couldn't outdrive this, she realized. The mile marker ahead read the same as the one behind. The sky stayed bruised at the horizon, never fully dark, never lightening. Time, for now, was not listening. She pulled back into the rest area. In the truck lot, she parked in the same spot, aligned her rig, set the brake. Her hands shook only a little. Inside the cab, she turned off her headlights, then her engine. The sudden quiet rang in her ears. For a long moment, she sat motionless, feeling the night press in around her. Then she did the thing every tired driver dreaded and depended on. She climbed into her sleeper, set her phone alarm for 2 hours exactly, lay down and closed her eyes. 2 hours, she whispered, as if the rest area itself were listening. Not a minute more. I am not one of you, I am going back to the road. Rain whispered on the roof in gentle, diminishing taps. The hum of the vending machines outside seemed to seep into the walls. A low, electric lullaby. She expected to lie awake, tense, waiting for knocks or voices. Instead, sleep came down on her like a soft, heavy blanket. She dreamed. In the dream, she stood at the edge of the car lot, watching workers in reflective vests and uniforms move between the same 3 vehicles. Their radios crackled, red and blue lights flashed silently in the fog. The sedan's doors hung open. A sheet covered the driver's seat. The minivan's side door slid back, revealing a jumble of blankets and a small, limp hand. The pickup's cab was shattered on one side. Glass scattered across the pavement like frost. She saw no faces, no blood. Just the shapes of people who weren't going to get back on the road, and the quiet, grim efficiency of those who came after. Somewhere beyond them, beyond the floodlights and the bowed heads, an electronic sign blinked. Rest area closed. Incident ahead. Then the dream shifted. The workers blurred. The lot emptied. Only the 3 vehicles remained, cleaned, closed up, parked in a neat row. Waiting. Jenna woke to bright light filtering through her curtains. For a moment she didn't know where she was. The hum under her body, the faint smell of coffee from an unopened thermos beside the bunk, the weight of a blanket over her all settled into place. Her truck. She checked her phone. 4:23 a.m. The alarm had not gone off yet. She'd woken early. Relief washed through her so strongly her hands tingled. She climbed into the driver's seat and pulled the curtain aside. The rest area looked ordinary in the gray pre-dawn. A couple of different trucks idled in the lot. A sedan with a bike rack and a dusty SUV sat in the car spaces. The old white sedan, red minivan, and tarpa-covered pickup were gone. The air felt lighter. The trees still shivered in a lingering breeze, but the tension that had pulled at the place was missing. Her dashboard clock read 4:24 when she turned the key. The analog clock over the restroom door, which she glimpsed on a quick trip inside, ticked steadily past the same time. Back on the highway, the mile markers finally changed. The sky brightened at the edges. Morning radio hosts started their chatter. A week later, over coffee with another driver, she mentioned the strange stretch. The other woman nodded slowly. "Yeah, people talk about that rest area," she said. "There was a bad carbon monoxide thing years back. Couple families parked too close to a line of idling reefers on a cold night. Some didn't wake up. Troopers shut the place for a while, opened it again when they put in better venting and signs." She stirred her coffee. "Some say, if you drive yourself half to death and blow past your brakes, you end up seeing the ones who didn't leave, like a warning, like the road's way of telling you to lie down before you become part of the scenery." Jenna thought of the 3 motionless cars, the reflective vest in the rain, the clocks frozen at 2:14. "I think I got the message," she said. After that, whenever her logbook told her it was time to stop, she stopped. She didn't argue with the numbers. She didn't tell herself she could squeeze in another hour or 2. Once, long after, she passed that same rest area just after midnight. Out of habit, she glanced at the lot. Nothing unusual waited there, just a few scattered vehicles. Still, she tapped the steering wheel twice and murmured, "Thanks for the push." To nobody in particular. The road rolled on ahead, endless and calm. Behind her, in a little concrete building under tired trees, a clock ticked quietly past 2:14 without pausing. Story number 5. Victor Morales never minded cities, even the ones that felt half asleep. He liked the way old brick factories and empty warehouses loomed over back streets, their windows black and watchful. He liked the orange glow of sodium lamps on wet pavement. Urban night runs felt contained somehow, like driving through the inside of a quiet machine. He'd been running regional freight for the same company for years. Distribution centers, cross docks, grocery warehouses, he knew the drill. Check in at the gate, back into a door, sign some papers, roll out. No nonsense. That was why the call from dispatch made him hesitate. He was already halfway through his shift, rolling along a belt of highway that skirted a former industrial district. The skyline ahead was mostly abandoned chimneys and the occasional office tower. His cab smelled of coffee and pine air freshener. The radio played low, a lady night show murmuring about sports scores. His phone buzzed in its dash mount. Company number. He tapped his headset. "Victor. Hey, Morales. dispatch said. This one was a new guy, voice still too chipper for the hour. You anywhere near mile 89 eastbound? Just past it, Victor said. Why? Got a hot load that needs moving tonight. Customer got a trailer sitting at Edgewater Logistics, Building C. They need it pulled and brought back to our yard before morning. You're the closest. Victor frowned. Edgewater. Thought that place shut down. Some of it did, the dispatcher said. Customers got partial use, they said. It's legit. They're paying rush rates. Victor looked ahead at the dark line of factories along the horizon. He'd heard drivers talk about Edgewater decades-old warehouse complex. Half of it shuttered after some kind of incident in the 90s. The parts still in use, they said, ran skeleton crews overnight. What door? He asked finally. Building C, Dock 12. They said gate would be open and yard lights on. GPS should get you the rest of the way. Extra 100 for the trouble. Victor thought of his kid's braces bill sitting on the kitchen counter. All right, he said. Text me the address. The pin came through a moment later. The GPS marked it with a little warehouse icon, tucked at the end of a maze of back streets. He left the highway at the next exit and wound his way down into the industrial zone. The farther he went, the fewer lights he saw. Old factories loomed on either side of the road, their windows boarded or broken. An occasional security light buzzed over a door, casting harsh circles on crumbling brick. It was a damp, chilly night. The pavement glistened with leftover drizzle. Somewhere in the dark, a train horn sounded, low and distant. The GPS led him to a wide, cracked road flanked by chain-link fence. A faded sign at the corner, half hidden behind overgrown bushes, read, Edgewater Logistics, authorized vehicles only. An iron gate stood across the entrance. As Victor rolled closer, he saw it hung slightly open, chain and padlock wrapped around one post but not quite fastened. The gate had been pulled just wide enough to admit a truck. He eased through, feeling the tires bump over the metal track in the concrete. Inside, the yard opened into a wide, empty space. On his right, a row of dark buildings sat shoulder to shoulder. On his left, a line of loading docks, most with their dock plates raised and doors rolled down. Only one section, farther ahead, glowed under buzzing lamps. Building C. The sign above its service door was newer than the others, the lettering clean. Building C, night operations. Victor rolled toward it, scanning for movement. No guard shack, no visible security cameras. The yard was quiet except for the low growl of his own engine and the occasional drip of water from sagging gutters. Halfway across, a speaker somewhere on the building crackled to life. Truck coming in, you're for Dock 12, a voice said, tinny and flat. Take it slow, Morales. Victor's foot eased off the accelerator. He hadn't given anyone his name yet. He stopped a few yards short of the line of docks and leaned out his window, craning his neck. A small metal box near the warehouse door had a red light glowing above a grill. A battered PA system. No window beside it where someone might be watching. Copy that, he called out anyway, voice sounding small in the open yard. He swung the truck around and lined up with Dock 12. The painted numbers over the bays were faded but readable. Only 10, 11, and 12 had their overhead lights on. The rest sat in darkness like sleeping mouths. He backed slowly, mirrors filling with concrete wall and yellow bumpers. As his trailer kissed the dock, the small red light beside the bay door clicked on, indicating that his rig was locked in place. In his side mirror, the door itself rolled up with a heavy rattle. A gust of colder air spilled out, smelling of dust, cardboard, and faintly of machine oil. Victor set the brake and waited for the usual. A knock on his cab, a clipboard, a worker's tired greeting. No one came. After a minute, he climbed down, jacket zipped against the chill, and walked along the side of his trailer toward the dock. The red light over the bay pulsed slowly, like a heartbeat. Inside the open doorway, the warehouse stretched into dimness. A small pool of bright light marked the immediate loading area. Beyond that, only shadows and the vague suggestion of tall racks. "Hello?" he called. His voice echoed, thin but sharp. Somewhere in the dark, a forklift's backup alarm beeped. The sound was faint, distorted by distance, but unmistakable. Metal clanked, like a pallet being set down. Victor stepped into the pool of light. The concrete floor beneath his boots felt smooth and cold. Dust motes drifted in the beam from the dock lamp. To his left, An orange pallet jack leaned against the wall, its handle wrapped with old tape. A clipboard sat on a small metal shelf by the door. He picked it up. Load. 1 trailer. Destination. Company yard. Trailer number. Left blank. Driver. V. Morales. Timeout. No one had written that last line. It was printed. His name had been on the page before he touched it. A shiver slipped between his shoulder blades. He looked out into the warehouse. In the darkness past the lit zone, he could just make out shapes. Pallets stacked high, their loads shrink-wrapped and opaque, metal racking stretching upward into gloom, a narrow aisle vanishing away between them. The beeping alarm sounded again, nearer this time, then drifted away as if the vehicle had turned down another aisle. "Anybody back there?" Victor called, louder. For a moment, the only answer was the whisper of air through high vents. Then, somewhere above him, high up on a catwalk, a man's voice called down, faint. "Stay by the dock, driver, load'll be ready." Victor squinted upward. Metal stairs climbed into the shadows. A narrow walkway ran along the wall, safety railings lined in dust. He saw no movement, no glint of a safety vest or hard hat. "Need me to open the doors?" Victor asked. A pause. "Already open," the voice said. "Just wait in the light." He frowned. He knew he'd left his trailer doors shut when he backed in. Standard. No one had knocked to say they were breaking seals. But when he peered around the edge of the dock, he saw that the doors now yawned wide, their hinges silent, lock and latch hanging loose. He hadn't heard them move. The red dock light over his head glowed brighter for a moment, then dimmed. He retreated a few steps and leaned against the wall, watching the dividing line between the bright dock area and the darker warehouse interior. The beam from a forklift should have appeared there at any moment. Yellow flash, followed by rumble and clatter. It didn't. Instead, pallets simply appeared. One moment his trailer's interior looked empty under the dock lamp's beam. The next, 3 shrink-wrapped stacks sat just inside, plastic gleaming. No footsteps, no engine noise, no squeal of pallet jack wheels. Victor blinked hard. His breath frosted faintly in the air, though it wasn't that cold outside. He stepped closer, peered at the nearest pallet's label. The paper was wrinkled and yellowed at the edges, as if it had been printed years ago. Edgewater Logistics, Route 7A. Delivery window, 2:30. Status, pending. The date field was empty. On the pallet above that, a label bore a list of city names. Victor recognized them every regular stop on a route he used to run with a different company, one that had gone out of business 5 years back. Another pallet had no text at all, only a barcode and a small typed line. Back-ordered promises. He huffed a nervous laugh at that, more out of discomfort than amusement. Behind him, something shuffled in the dark, like boots on concrete. He turned quickly. For a brief, wavering second, he thought he saw a forklift at the edge of the light. Its orange frame, its mast, the glow of a headlamp. A figure sat in the seat, head turned toward him, reflective strips on a vest catching the dock's illumination. Then the image bled away into shadow. There was nothing there. On the far wall, half hidden by the angle of the dock lamp, a board hung, covered in plastic sleeves. Schedules, maybe, or old shift rosters. He moved closer, drawn by the faint whiteness of paper. It was a memorial. Blackened and white photocopied photos, some grainy, some clearer, looked out at him from under the plastic. Men and women in hard hats, smiling at company picnics, posing beside forklifts, leaning against loaded pallets. Under each, a name and 2 dates. He read a few automatically. The years lined up, decades of workers' lives, sketched in tiny font. Near the bottom, a newer sheet caught his eye. The paper wasn't as yellowed. The ink was darker. A heading read, "In memory of the night of February 3, second shift, building C." Underneath were several photos grouped together, corners overlapping slightly. The dates under them were close. All ended on the same night. Victor's stomach tightened. He'd heard something, long ago, about a racking collapse. A story told in a break room by drivers who gestured loosely, eyes gone distant. He didn't look too closely at the faces. He didn't want to try to match them to the echo of voices overhead. Below those photos, at the very bottom, a single clear sleeve held a page with printed lines and handwritten scribbles. "Visiting. Drivers. Night shift. Thank you for keeping us moving." A list of names followed, some in neat block letters, some in hurried scrawl. A few he recognized. Old hands in the region, guys he seldom saw anymore. At the very bottom, typed in the same clean font as the clipboard, his own name sat on its own line. V. Morales. Feb. 02. The day and minutes remained blank. A chill spread outward from his chest. "Time's tight tonight," the voice from the catwalk called again, closer now, as if the speaker had leaned over the rail. "Window closes at 2 other. Don't miss it." Victor checked his watch. 2:28 a.m. His heart leaped into a faster rhythm. He hadn't been inside that long, had he? He looked back at his truck. The dash clock through the windshield matched his watch. 2:28. "Dock's loaded," the voice said. "You can go now if you're quick." He didn't need more encouragement. He scribbled his name on the clipboard form where a signature line waited, set it back on the shelf with fingers that weren't entirely steady, and walked briskly to his cab. As he climbed in, he felt a weight of attention on his back, as if a dozen unseen eyes watched from the warehouse gloom. He started the engine. The red dock light flipped to green the instant his hand touched the gear shift. In the mirror, the bay door began to roll down, rattling fast. Victor pulled forward, clearing the dock. The moment his rear wheels came off the concrete apron, the dock lights along Building C went out. The yard fell into a deeper shadow, lit only by a few distant lampposts. He didn't look back until he reached the gate. At the entrance, he stopped and glanced in his mirror. From this angle, Building C looked like any other abandoned warehouse. No signs glowed. Most of the windows were broken. The night operations sign hung crooked, one corner pulled free. The gate he'd driven through now sat chained and locked, padlock snapped shut. His headlights illuminated a weathered piece of plywood nailed to the fence. Property condemned. No entry. By order of City Safety Board. Victor's skin tightened all over. He checked his mirrors again, his dashboard, his phone. 2:31 a.m. He drove back to the yard with the radio off. The only sound the steady growl of the engine and the occasional rattle from the trailer behind him. When he arrived, the overnight dispatcher on duty looked up in surprise. "Thought you weren't going to take that run," he said. "Didn't see your check-in time hit the system." "You called me," Victor said. "Said it was hot." Edgewater Logistics, Building C, Dock 12. The dispatcher's brow furrowed. He clicked at his keyboard, eyes scanning lines of text. "There's nothing here," he said. "No outbound from Edgewater. We don't even have them in the active customer list anymore." Victor stared at him. "Then what am I pulling?" They went out into the lot together. Victor opened the trailer doors. Inside, stacks of pallets sat in neat rows, wrapped and labeled. The dispatcher shone a flashlight over the nearest one, reading, "Looks like mixed dry goods," he said slowly. "Non-perishables. This consignee number's ours. These are supposed to be here." He pointed at a logo printed in the corner of the label. It matched Victor's company's current brand. In the other corner, smaller and faded, the Edgewater Logistics logo sat like a watermark. "Maybe the paperwork got banged up in the system," the dispatcher said, trying to sound casual. "We'll sort it out." Victor later checked his phone history. No call showed at the time he remembered. Just his outgoing check-in, nothing inbound. He didn't sleep much that day. When he finally dozed, forklifts beeped in his dreams, backing up and turning away down endless aisles. A week later, on a break in a diner, he mentioned Edgewater to an older driver who'd been around the region longer than anyone. "Building C?" the man said, stirring sugar into his coffee. "They closed that down after the rack collapse. Whole second shift got caught when the steel went. Heard they were picking up cases for a week. Never did reopen that building. Company folded." "What time did it happen?" Victor asked. The man thought. "'Twas something in the morning, 20 years back." "Why?" Victor didn't answer. He found himself staring at the stainless steel napkin holder, at his own faint reflection in it, superimposed over rows of sugar packets and plastic creamers. On his next few runs past that part of the city, he stayed on the Beltway. He didn't look toward the industrial streets. He didn't let the GPS recalculate him down there, no matter how much time it claimed he'd save. Still, once in a while, parked at a regular distribution center with other trucks lined up and forklifts zipping around in clear, ordinary patterns, he would hear just at the edge of his hearing The phantom beep of a backup alarm, far away and strangely hollow. Not any of the forklifts in front of him. Those had the higher-pitched, modern chirp, an older sound, a slower one, fading, but not quite gone. On those nights, as he signed bills and watched pallets roll onto his trailer, he would glance at the warehouse clocks and his own watch, making sure the minute hand kept moving past 2:30 without pausing. And he never again agreed to a load whose pickup point didn't show up cleanly in the system, no matter how good the bonus sounded or how close he happened to be. Story number 6. Caleb Horn had a quiet respect for way stations. Some drivers grumbled about them, some tried to dodge them, but Caleb treated every glowing open sign along the highway like a stoplight. He'd seen what happened to guys who tried to cut corners, the fines, the shutdowns, the notes in their records that followed them from company to company. Scale houses aren't your enemy, his first trainer had told him. They're like mile markers, part of the landscape. Pay attention to them, and they'll usually let you go on your way. Years later, Caleb ran mostly nights along a long east-west interstate that crossed 3 states. One particular state line always stood out. The line itself ran across empty farmland and low, murky swamps. Just before the border, on the right side of the eastbound lanes, an old way station sat like a forgotten tooth. It had been closed for as long as he'd run that route. The building was low and flat, with a peeling blue roof and dirty windows. The big overhead sign above the ramp was perpetually dark. An LED board that once flashed open or closed hung crooked, its face blank. Grass poked through cracks in the concrete lots. The only thing that ever seemed to change was the graffiti on the concrete barriers. Drivers still called it the dead house. Burned once, an older driver had said years before, over coffee in a truck stop. Electrical fire in the wiring, or so they said. Took out half the building. State decided it was cheaper to rebuild a new station further in. Left that one to rot. Caleb had never thought much about it beyond that. Each trip, he'd pass the abandoned station, glance at the dark windows, and keep rolling. It was a landmark, nothing more. Until one night in late autumn, light rain had slicked the highway into a dark, glassy strip. Caleb's wipers whispered back and forth. Fog hugged the ditches and drifted in low fingers across the median. The interstate was almost empty, just his rig, the occasional set of distant taillights, and the pale smear of headlights way behind. It was just before 2 in the morning. His logbook was clean, his trailer was sealed with a legal weight, and he was making good time. As the state line approached, the silhouette of the dead house rose on the right, familiar. Then, as his truck came within sight of it, the overhead sign flickered on. Bring in truck. Way station. Open. The words glowed amber against the fog. Caleb blinked and leaned forward a little. The old LED board that had been dark for years now pulsed with moving text. All trucks. Left lane must enter. Next right. His first instinct was that the state had quietly reopened the place. Maybe construction had finished. Maybe budget battles had finally settled. He checked his mirrors. No other trucks were pressing close behind him. If he blew past a live scale, he'd have to answer for it later. He flicked on his turn signal and eased into the right lane, guiding the rig onto the off-ramp. The ramp curved gently toward the station. Sodium lamps cast pools of pale orange on the wet concrete. The grass along the shoulders glistened. The old blue roof looked newer in the light, less patchy than he remembered. As he approached the entrance, a green sign above the lane lit up. Open. Please proceed. The little red arrow on the bypass lane pointed down, indicating it was closed. Caleb rolled over the first set of rumble strips, feeling the familiar vibration through the steering wheel. Ahead, the small glass booth where scale officers usually sat glowed dimly. He stopped at the white line. A sign on a pole read, "Stop and wait, for green light." On the other side of the glass, a figure sat at a desk, head bent as if reading. The interior light was a dull yellow, buzzing faintly. A radio played something soft and old, barely audible through the rain. The figure looked up. It was a man in a blue uniform shirt and darker tie, hair cut short, pale face lined but not unfriendly. His badge caught the light, though Caleb couldn't read the name from this distance. The uniform design looked dated, somehow. The logo patch on the sleeve was a version the state hadn't used in years. The man reached for a microphone and pressed a button. A speaker on the pole outside the window crackled. "Evening, driver," the man's voice said, tinny but clear. "Pull ahead onto the scale. Stop when the light is red." Caleb nodded out of habit, though he knew the man couldn't really see him in the dark cab, and eased forward. The scale itself was just a flat patch of concrete with metal plates embedded, painted outlines of truck and trailer faintly visible. He rolled onto it, watching the small signal light ahead. It flipped from green to red. He stopped. A digital readout mounted beside the booth flickered as his weight registered. The numbers climbed, then hesitated, then settled. The readout glowed in blue digits, not the crisp green of the new stations he was used to. They ticked higher than expected by a few thousand pounds. Caleb frowned. His paperwork said he was well under the limit. His truck didn't feel heavy. The last scale he'd hit earlier that night had cleared him without a blink. The microphone crackled again. "You're a little over, Mr. Horn." His hands tightened on the wheel. He had not given the officer his name. "I'm showing 82.8, the man continued. "Your manifest says 78.5. That's a lot of extra." Caleb cleared his throat. "Had a clean weight at the last station," he said. "Maybe your scale's off." A pause, just long enough to notice. The man in the booth looked at something Caleb couldn't see, then back toward the cab. "These scales are very exact," he replied. "They measure more than steel and rubber." Something in his tone wasn't threatening, exactly. Just too calm. "Pop your brakes and come on in," the man added. "Bring your logbook." Caleb didn't like leaving his truck on a live scale. But the setup felt official enough, and he'd handled worse inspections. He set the brake, grabbed his folder, pulled on a jacket, and climbed down. Rain misted his face as he crossed the short distance to the booth. Under the overhang, the air smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. Inside the booth, the air was too warm. A wall fan ticked lazily without moving much. The man behind the desk looked up as Caleb stepped in. Up close, the uniform seams were slightly frayed, as if it had seen many years of wear. The nameplate on his chest read, "Harris." "Evening," Harris said again, as if starting the conversation anew. "Let's have a look." Caleb handed over his logbook and paperwork. Harris's fingers were long and pale, nails neatly trimmed, skin oddly cool when they brushed Caleb's. The inspector flipped through the pages, eyes scanning each line with swift precision. His brow furrowed once or twice. "Not at any violation, but at dates. You were on this stretch 2 months ago," he said, "and 3 before that, and last winter." He tapped a finger on one entry. "Ran through a black ice advisory here, didn't you?" Caleb blinked. "Weather was rough, yeah. Took it slow." "And the car that spun out ahead of you?" Harris continued. "You crossed 2 lanes to miss it. Trailer pulled hard. You thought you were going over. It wasn't a question. It was the exact memory of a night that had left Caleb shaking even after he parked. He hadn't written anything about it in his logs, just noted a delay. "How do you know that?" Caleb asked quietly. Harris set the logbook down. "We keep records," he said. "Not just the state's, ours." On the wall behind the desk, instead of the usual charts about axle weights and fine schedules, a large board hung filled with laminated cards. Each one had a truck number, a route, and a short note. Jackknife, mile 147, snow. Blown tire, left lane, saved. Brake failure, hill grade, didn't. Some cards had a small red dot in the corner. Some were plain white. "Some nights," Harris said, noticing Caleb's glance, "the road carries more than freight. A lot of what comes through here is near misses, almosts, could it haven't beens." He tapped Caleb's manifest with one finger. "Your extra weight tonight isn't boxes or pallets." The digital readout outside the window flickered in the corner of Caleb's eye. For a second, instead of numbers, he thought he saw letters. Unreported, 3. Then the display snapped back to the usual blue digits. "This station watches the line," Harris said. "Not just between states, between outcomes." "I'm just hauling paper goods," Caleb said. His voice sounded smaller than he'd like. "Got a delivery window at dawn. Not sure I understand what this place is, officer." Harris studied him, expression unreadable. "Officially, he said. "We were shut down years ago. Fire in the wiring. Building condemned. New facility went up 30 miles east." He smiled faintly. "Unofficially, there are still loads that need to be weighed in ways the new place can't manage." He slid the logbook back across the desk. "3 times now," he went on. "You've passed within a few inches or seconds of not making it to the next mile marker. Once on ice. Once with a steer tire ready to give. Once when a drowsy driver drifted over the line and you saw him at the last moment." He said it not accusingly, just as if reciting facts. Caleb's mind flicked through memories. The car fishtailing in front of him. The vibration in a front tire that had turned out to be cords showing through. The white sedan that had wandered into his lane one lonely night until his horn startled its driver awake. "Those add up," Harris said. "Not in pounds, exactly. In kind. We like to keep track." "Why?" Caleb asked. "What happens when they add up too much?" Harris glanced past Caleb, toward the truck sitting on the scale outside. Rain dotted the windshield, making the cab's interior a soft blur. "Some drivers skip their exits," he said. "Blow off closed signs. Pretend scales aren't there. The road has its own way of catching them. You don't seem the type." He stood slowly. His uniform creaked faintly. "Tell you what, Mr. Horn. We'll clear you tonight. You're a little heavy with what you've been carrying, but it's not all yours to keep. Consider this. A reminder that the margin is not unlimited." Harris walked to the console and flipped a switch. Outside, the signal light on the pole changed from red to green. The blue digits on the weight display dipped by exactly 300 pounds. Caleb felt a strange lightness in his chest at the same moment, like the air had thinned around him. "What did you just do?" he asked. "Shifted a bit of what might have been back where it belongs," Harris answered. "For now." He looked at Caleb with something like sympathy. "Next time, don't wander in here after dark. Go to the new station. This one's not meant for you yet." The yet hung in the air longer than the rest. Caleb swallowed. "Am I free to go?" "For the moment." Harris offered a hand. Caleb shook it. The inspector's grip was firm, cool. His eyes, up close, looked older than his face tired, as if they'd watched too many headlights, crest too many hills, and then not appear again. Back in his cab, Caleb released the brakes and rolled slowly off the scale. In his mirror, he saw Harris standing in the booth, hand raised in a small, almost absent wave. As the truck's rear wheels cleared the plates, the station around him seemed to dim. The overhead lamps flickered. The big sign that had announced open a few minutes earlier buzzed and went dark. By the time he reached the end of the ramp and merged back onto the interstate, the way station behind him looked exactly as it always had, an abandoned shell with boarded windows and a dead sign. The rain lightened. Fog hung low over the fields. Up ahead, the new, modern way station signs glowed faintly. Closed. Caleb drove on until he found a truck stop, pulled in, and parked under the harsh parking lot lights. In the quiet cab, with his engine idling low, he took out his logbook. On the page for that night, between his neat lines of times and locations, a faint, almost invisible mark had appeared near his entry for the state line. 3 tiny lines like tally marks, then a slash through them, as if someone had counted to 3 and then crossed it out. He flipped through earlier pages. Near the dates, Harris had mentioned the ice, the tire, the drifting car. Similar tallies marked the margin. So faint, they looked like impressions rather than ink. In the pocket of his jacket, his fingers brushed paper. He pulled it out. It was a scale ticket, the kind printers at way stations spat out. At the top, it bore the emblem of the old state highway department, a logo retired more than a decade earlier. Below, it listed his truck number, his license plate, the time, 2:03 a.m. The date printed under it was not that night's date, but one from many years before the winter his trainer had first brought him through this corridor. Under gross weight, numbers read 78,520 pounds. Adjusted, 78,220 pounds. Beside that, in small letters, noted, near incidents, 3. Status, cleared, temporary. Caleb stared at it until his eyes blurred. The following afternoon, when daylight washed the world into more ordinary colors, he pulled up satellite images of the border on his phone. The dead house showed clearly. Rusted roof, cracked lot, boarded booth, articles. He, found on old news sites, mentioned a fire at the station 15 years earlier. The names of 3 officers were listed among the injured. One had died later of smoke inhalation. Their surnames included Horace. On his next run, he passed the abandoned station around noon. In sunshine, it looked smaller, sadder. The windows were dark squares. The LED sign hung lopsided and lifeless. No trucks lined up, no lights burned. He rolled past without slowing. At the new station 30 miles on, the fresh signs lit up. Open. He pulled in, rolled over bright steel plates, and handed his papers to a young officer in a crisp, modern uniform. Everything looked clean and functional. "You're good," the officer said after a quick glance. "Nice and legal. Have a safe one." Back on the interstate, Caleb watched the mirrors. The road unwound behind him, ordinary and gray. No flickering lights, no half-seen figures. Still, on certain damp nights when fog hugged the fields near the border and the old dead house loomed in silhouette, he felt his stomach knot just a little until he was past it. He never again took its ramp, no matter what the signs might have said, and he found himself driving just a touch more carefully on ice, listening more closely to the hum and thrum of his tires, watching the lanes around him with a little extra attention. Not out of fear of fines or citations, but with the uneasy awareness that somewhere along the line, some stations weighed more than his cargo. The road kept its own ledger. On one quiet, rainy night, he had seen the page where his name was written. Story number 7. Malcolm "Mal" Strickland had been driving long enough to see the industry change around him. Paper logs to electronic, payphones to smartphones, CB chatter to company apps. He went along with most of it without much fuss. The one thing he never really warmed up to was the camera. His company had installed dash cams in every unit that year, little black rectangles stuck to the windshield, one lens facing the road, the other pointed back into the cab. Always watching, always uploading. AI safety, the memo had said. Real-time coaching, event detection, lower insurance premiums. It's not about catching you doing something wrong. It's about keeping everyone alive. Mal muttered something unprintable when the tech glued his in place, but he let it happen. He was a clean driver. No reason to be nervous. The first few weeks, the camera behaved itself. It chirped once or twice when he glanced at his phone, a little synthesized voice saying, "Eyes on the road," in a chipper, genderless tone. It dinged if he followed too closely. He learned to tune it out. Then, one quiet afternoon after a night run, his phone buzzed with a call from safety. "Mal, you got a minute?" The voice belonged to Darren, the safety manager. Harried, friendly on good days, all business on bad ones. "Yeah," Mal said, sitting on the edge of his bunk in the sleeper. Sunlight striped the lot outside. "What's up?" "We had an event flag on your trip last night," Darren said. System tagged it as distraction divided by unknown passenger. "You hauling someone you forgot to mention?" Mal frowned. "You know better than that." "I work alone." "That's what I figured," Darren replied. "But I've got to ask. The camera thinks it saw 2 faces. One's definitely you. The other..." He trailed off. "I'm going to email you a still. Tell me what you see." A few seconds later, Mal's inbox pinged. He opened the image. It was a grainy frame from the inward-facing camera. His own profile dominated the shot. Ball cap, gray stubble, hands on the wheel. Night outside the side window, broken only by the faint smear of guardrail reflectors. Behind him, in the dark mouth of the sleeper, something pale floated just above the bunk level. If he squinted, he could see the vague outline of a face. Cheeks too thin, eyes too wide, staring straight at the camera. No color, no detail, just the suggestion of features. The timestamp in the corner read 3 hours, 12 minutes, and 48 seconds. "That's a reflection," Mal said, heart beating a notch faster than he liked. "Off the glass, or a curtain fold. The algorithm's jumpy." "Yeah, that's what I thought too," Darren said. "The system logged it as a passenger without belt event. It does that when it finds a second face. I'll mark it as false positive. Just keep the lens clean. Okay? Glare can mess with it." "Sure," Mal said. He ended the call. But he didn't close the photo right away. The face in the dark wasn't his. It wasn't the company tech's reflection. The guy had been gone hours by then. Mal held the phone closer. The eyes, if they were eyes, looked off-center, like the head was tilted at a slight angle, watching him from just over his shoulder. He told himself it was nothing. He deleted the email, cleaned the camera lens with a microfiber cloth, and got some sleep. The next week, it happened again. He was halfway through a night run through open farmland, sky black and starless, when the camera chimed. "Coaching event," the neutral voice said. "Eyes on road." "I am looking," he grumbled. He hadn't glanced at his phone. His gaze had flicked briefly to the fuel gauge, that was all. The LED on the camera blinked red, then green. It settled. The next afternoon, another call. "Mal, buddy," Darren said. "We're getting spooked down here. You sure you're not pranking us?" "I don't have the energy to prank anyone," Mal replied. "What now?" "Same deal," Darren said. "Event at 3:13. System says, additional occupant, seat unbelted, possible fatigue." I pulled the clip. "You want to see it?" Mal hesitated, then said yes. The video loaded in the company app. 30 seconds grayed out around the event. He watched himself driving, hands steady, eyes scanning. The glow from the dash painted his face. Outside, nothing but the white lines and the occasional reflector post. At 3 hours, 13 minutes and 7 seconds, as his truck passed an unremarkable mile marker, the lighting in the cab shifted. For a fraction of a second, the space behind him darkened, as if a shadow had fallen across the sleeper. Then, at the very edge of the frame, something moved. A shape leaned forward out of the gloom, just enough that the camera's detection box snapped onto it. A rectangle appeared on screen, green outline around a blurred, pale oval. The AI superimposed its label in the corner. Passenger. The shape didn't have clear features. It was like someone had taken the idea of a face and smudged it. Yet Mal had the very strong impression that whatever it was looking not at the road, but at him. He touched the screen to rewind, played it again, slowed it down. Each time, that smear of a face formed a little more convincingly out of the graininess, like his brain was making sense of static. His skin prickled. Then, just as the audio chimed, "Eyes on road," the thing in the sleeper pulled back into the dark and vanished. Darren's voice came over the phone speaker. "I'm gonna log it as a glitch again," he said. "System update went through last week. Might have some bugs. But, you okay out there?" "I'm fine," Mal said. It was mostly true. He wasn't tired. He wasn't seeing things out the windshield, only on the replay. After they hung up, he contacted 2 other drivers he knew who ran the same corridor. "You getting any weird false passenger flags at night?" he asked, keeping his tone light. One laughed it off. "My wife rode with me once. Camera screamed bloody murder every 10 minutes, he said. "Other than that, no." "Why?" The second driver, a woman named Trish, paused. "Not on mine," she said, "but I heard Levi complaining about something like that. Swore the dash cam kept seeing somebody in his bunk. Safety told him his jacket was hanging funny. You know how Levi is. Jumpy." The next trip, Mal paid more attention to his surroundings around 3 a.m. The route where the events had happened was unremarkable. Flat highway, patchwork of empty fields, and dark farmhouses. A narrow county road crossed over at one point on an old concrete bridge. He'd never had a reason to remember it. That night, as the dash clock nudged past 3:10, he turned the radio down. The hum of the engine and the soft rush of tires on asphalt filled the cab. He adjusted his mirror, glancing briefly at the sleeper. Nothing but shadows and the faint outline of his rolled-it-up sleeping bag. Up ahead, the little bridge rose, a silhouette against the faint glow of a distant town. The camera stayed quiet. He drove under the bridge. For an instant, his headlights lit its underside. Old concrete, stained with dark streaks. A tangle of vines creeping over the sides. On the far side, his eyes flicked up to the mirror again. The sleeper was still empty. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The chime sounded not even 3 seconds later. "Coaching event," the voice announced. "Eyes on road." He tensed, jaw clenching. "I am looking," he snapped. The LED blinked red-green-red, as if the device were thinking. No call came from safety the next day. No email. For a moment, he let himself believe the AI had finally sorted itself out. Then, at the end of his shift, as he was about to log off the app, a notification popped up. New event review available. He almost ignored it. Curiosity tugged his finger onto the icon. The clip began like the others. His face, lit by the dash. The black outside. A hint of the bridge. At the edge of the windshield. At 3 hours 13 minutes and 5 seconds, a truck passed him in the opposite direction, its headlights flaring momentarily into the cab. In that split second of glare, the interior camera adjusted its exposure. For 4 frames, 4 tiny snapshots of a second, the image sharpened. Mal watched his own reflection in the side window. Behind it, in the faint double exposure from the glass, another face overlapped his. Younger, gaunter, eyes hollowed by lack of sleep. A tattoo like a small dark comma peeked up from the collar of a sweatshirt. Not Mal's face at any age he recognized. The overlay flickered and was gone, like a ghost image on an old television. He froze the frame and zoomed in, even though compression artifacts broke the picture into blocks. The double was seated in the driver's seat, same as him, same angle, same wheel. But there was no truck outside the window in that version, only darkness. He stared until his eyes watered. The image meant nothing. It had to mean nothing. Artifact? Glitch? Digital crosstalk? From some training set the AI developer had used. He closed the app. The following week, the company launched a mandatory online safety module. At the end, a short video played a testimonial from a driver about the importance of rest breaks and recognizing fatigue. They'd use stock footage. Trucks on winding roads. Tired eyes in close-up. Then a slide appeared with a list of lessons learned, including a short case summary. Fatality. Driver asleep. Rural overpass. 3:14 a.m. Single vehicle crash. No other injuries. A blurry photo of a wrecked cab under an overpass flashed up for 2 seconds. It was old, discolored. The company logo on the door belonged to a carrier that had folded years ago. The bridge in the picture looked exactly like the one on Mal's route. The timestamp at the bottom right read 3 hours 13 minutes and 52 seconds. He scratched at his jaw, pulse drumming. Coincidence, he said under his breath. But the word didn't settle anything. He considered asking Darren if any of the AI's training data had come from archived crash videos. He didn't. He wasn't sure he wanted to hear yes. The next time his run put him out there at 3 a.m., fog had rolled in. It lay in low sheets over the fields, thickest in the dips and hollows. The overpass ahead rose like a pale, smudged line through the haze. He told himself he could always pull off. Wait it out at the next exit. Let the clock slide. Behind him, the sleeper was a deeper darkness. His own reflection wavered faintly in the side window. As he approached the bridge, the camera chimed, unprompted. Event in progress, the voice said. But it sounded different this time. Not entirely synthetic. A roughness threaded the syllables. What event? Mal snapped. I'm good. I'm alert. The chime dinged again. Eyes on road, Mal, the voice said. It spoke his name for the first time. His hands tightened. Fog thickened around the base of the overpass, swallowing the supports. He focused on the white lines, the faint glimmer of the guardrail. Out of the corner of his eye, in the passenger side mirror, something moved in the cab. He did not turn his head. Every lesson he'd ever learned screamed at him not to take his eyes fully off the pavement at that moment. In the mirror's narrow angle, he saw part of the sleeper reflected. A shape leaned forward from the bunk, as if to peer through the windshield. Not just a blur this time, a suggestion of shoulders, of a head with closely cropped hair, a hand braced lightly on the back of Mal's seat. The shape turned its head a fraction, angling toward the passenger side window. Mal followed that implied gaze without thinking. His headlights picked up the slick shine of something pooled in the right lane just ahead. A wide, shallow film of water where a drainage culvert had backed up, oil rainbowed on its surface. In fog that thick, he might have missed it until the front tire hit. On instinct, he eased left, gentle but firm, straddling the line so the bulk of his weight missed the worst of it. The truck slid slightly as the right tires touched the edge of the water, then caught again. He kept his grip steady, gaze forward, muscles tense until the bridge was behind him and the road leveled out. Only then did he let himself flick a full look into the cab. The sleeper was empty. The inward-facing camera lens stared back at him, a black glass bead. The chime sounded one last time. "Event resolved," the voice said. For the briefest instant, Mal thought he heard another voice layered under it. Quieter. Rougher. Like a tired young man whispering. "You're clear." He drove the rest of the night with the radio off, the only sounds the engine's murmur and the low hiss of fog against the windshield. No call came from safety the next day. No email. When he checked the app, there was an event listed at 3:13, but its description field was empty. No tag. Just a time and a green check mark. At the next safety meeting, in a break room that smelled of burned coffee, Mal lingered until most drivers had filed out. Then he approached Darren. "That old crash in the module," Mal said. "The one at the overpass. You ever get dashcam footage off that truck?" Darren shook his head. "That was before cameras were standard," he said. "We just had photos and witness statements." "Why?" "No reason," Mal lied. "Just looked familiar." That night, before heading out, he reached up and gently tilted the inward-facing camera a few degrees to the side, so it no longer had a perfect view of the sleeper. Officially, that wasn't allowed. If caught, he'd have to straighten it. For now, no one said anything. On lonely stretches after midnight, when his thoughts strayed too far and the road ahead blurred into sameness, he found himself murmuring under his breath. "Still there, kid?" he might say, eyes on the asphalt. "You see something I don't. You go ahead and ring that bell." The camera's LED glowed a steady green. Sometimes it stayed quiet all night. Sometimes, near that old bridge or on other strange empty miles, it chimed once, twice, with no clear cause. When it did, Mal always took a second look at his mirrors, his gauges, the weather, the shape of the road ahead. He drove a little more carefully than even his record demanded. And though he never again saw a clear face when he replayed the footage, only blurs, shadows, tricks of light, he couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere in the compression artifacts and data layers lived the echo of a driver who hadn't been as lucky, riding along now as a half-remembered pattern in a machine that didn't really understand what it had learned. The company called it AI2-powered safety. Mal, alone in his cab with the quiet camera in the dark, privately called it something else. A passenger who'd already taken the worst curve the road could offer, and who wasn't quite ready to let anyone else follow.